Have you ever wondered what it's like to live here in Jacksonville, Florida? Well, in today's video, I'm gonna break all of that down and give you the top 15 things you need to know before moving to Jacksonville, Florida. These are gonna be fun facts, they're gonna be things that only the locals know, but most importantly, they're gonna be things that you need to know before making your move here to Jacksonville. So with that being said, let's get right on into this video. All right, so did you know that Jacksonville is the largest city land-wise in the continental United States? That is more of a fun fact that I love to discuss because people don't always realize just how large Jacksonville is. Jacksonville as a whole is over 800 square miles, which you could fit Miami, New York City, and Boston all within the confines of what is Jacksonville. So when it comes to living in Jacksonville, what that means is it may sometimes take you even up to an hour to get from one place to another, depending on where exactly in Jacksonville you're at and where you're going to. So another cool aspect about Jacksonville that people don't always know about is that in 1968, the city of Jacksonville merged with Duval County to make one of the only city-county governments in the whole country. So that is something that's very unique to Jacksonville, and that's why when you live in Duval County, that is considered more your Jacksonville, Florida. But overall, Jacksonville does still include areas such as Clay, St. Johns, and Nassau County when being discussed about, okay, where do you live? I live in Jacksonville, but I live in that part of Jacksonville. But here's also the interesting part, is that areas like Atlantic Beach, Jax Beach, Neptune Beach still maintained their own specific governments. So when you live in areas like that, you actually will have different trash pickup and sometimes different people to kind of report to in some regards compared to living in Jacksonville, Florida. That being said, when you live in those areas, again, we still tend to call it Jacksonville as a whole. It's just you're out at the beaches. So here in Jacksonville, we have not one, but two Navy bases located within Jacksonville with NAS Jax, which can be more west side Jacksonville along the St. Johns River, and then also Mayport, which is at the opening to the Atlantic Ocean. And these two Navy bases bring a huge demographic of Navy professionals into the city, also leaving the city as they get different orders. But also, we also have Jaxport, and our port here is one of the largest, not the largest port in the state. So it brings along with it plenty of logistics jobs and transportation jobs, one of which is, if you are looking for something like that, makes Jacksonville maybe a great fit for you and your family. And it is a huge presence in our culture here in Jacksonville. All right, I'm sure you hear this one all the time, but again, if you haven't, here in Jacksonville, the summers are hot. We're talking, mid 90s, humidity pushes that up to the mid to low hundreds. It is one of those things that during the summertime, you definitely want to be on or in the water around here. Whether if it's pools or if it's the St. Johns River or if it's the ocean, just because it is sometimes just that hot. But winters, well, winters can be perfection. We do get some milder winters in January, February, where you may get into the 30s at night, maybe 40s during the day. But in general, the winters and the fall and spring that come with it before and after really give you a lot of amazing days in Jacksonville. I always joke with people that are moving here that the perfect day in Jacksonville is a day where it's in the high 60s to low 70s, very minimal humidity, and not a cloud in the sky, with a slight cool breeze. You can't ask for better weather than that here, especially because it allows you to do anything you'd want outside. And you do see people here during the winter, fall, the spring, constantly out, on the water, at the beach, biking, walking, different nature trails, different parks that we have here. And it really does make Jacksonville truly a year-round destination to be able to be outside and enjoy the nature, enjoy the weather due to how good it is here in Jacksonville. And as far as the culture here, it really is a culture, Southern charm with some coastal cool. We do get a little bit of everything. So again, we have the Jacksonville, art market down in the Riverside area, Riverside Art Market more so is what they call it. We also have different festivals like the Jazz Fest, the Blues Fest, and there's also different events that go on like the Gate River Run, as well as obviously the Florida Georgia game that comes here once a year. So there's always different attraction to do, different things to do here, and the culture really does give you a little bit of everything. No matter what you may like, Jacksonville has that for you. So that is something that I do personally love here about Jacksonville. So when it comes to living in Jacksonville, and really when it comes to moving anywhere in general, I'm sure the cost of living is something that is very much important to you when you're watching this video. What I can tell you is here in Jacksonville, we have one of the best costs of living in the state. That's not to mean that it's cheap to live here. We do tend to see utility bills in the $300s, $400s a month, depending on how cool you keep your house, especially during the summertime, and how warm you keep the house during the wintertime. In addition, when you live in Jacksonville, your trash and recycle pickup actually comes out with your taxes. And normally those fees have been in the couple $100s a year range, but we are seeing those go up as well. So it is one of those things that if you want a more detailed breakdown, I have an amazing video that you'll be able to check out on this channel about the whole cost of living in Jacksonville. But it is something that you do have to think about when it comes to moving to Jacksonville. The good part, we are one of the cheaper ones in the state for major metro cities. The bad part doesn't mean that we're cheap in general. There is still a cost to living here. And then here's another one for you, property taxes. So when it comes to living in Jacksonville, something that you need to know before moving here is the property taxes here aren't gonna be the cheapest. One great thing about living in Florida that I love and that most people love is there's no state income tax. However, here in Jacksonville, specifically Duval County, Jacksonville, we have one of the highest millage rates, which is what they use to determine your taxes in the state of Florida. So you are gonna have higher taxes here than maybe other parts of the state, or maybe the state that you're potentially moving from, or city you're moving from. Now the good part, up to the north with Nassau, down to the south with St. John's, and out to the west with Clay County, those all have much lower millage rates. Now they do have what's called a CDD fee, Community Development District fee, that do kind of play a role in it as well for your taxes. But without those millage rates make the taxes in those counties some of the lowest across the board in all of Florida. So it's not all bad, it's also not all good. But you know what? I'll still take that over state income tax any day. In addition to property tax, something else to take into account is homeowners insurance and car insurance. The insurance here in Florida can be a bit on the pricier side. So again, car insurance is definitely up there as one of the highest in the country, but also when it comes to homeowners insurance, you do see quite high homeowners insurance rates, especially depending on the age of the house. So older homes especially are gonna have a much higher insurance rate across the board. Now that's gonna be partially due to natural events like hurricanes, but also it is partially also due to the amount of claims that we've seen for roofs and other things over the years. So it is one of those things, if you want to know more about the taxes and the insurance as it relates to different parts of Jacksonville and different homes in Jacksonville, don't forget to reach out to me so we can go over all of that in more detail as well. Another thing you must know is that Jacksonville is growing at a tremendous rate. Part of this is because during COVID, it really put us on the map, but we are constantly getting more and more people moving to Jacksonville each and every day. We're on pace to hit over 2 million people in Jacksonville by 2030. And that may not sound like a big number depending on what city or state you're coming from, but here in Jacksonville, that's a huge influx of people from where we were at just a decade ago to where we'd be at in 2030. So with that though, does come sometimes higher prices across the board. That's gonna kind of play in that cost of living, especially home prices. So it is one of those things that, if you need to know more or want to know more about that, reach out to me so we can go over all of that. But overall, it is one of those things that makes Jacksonville a great city to live in, because with more people also comes more development, but there also sometimes are some things that aren't so great with it as well, such as prices. If you love the water, then you're gonna love Jacksonville, because Jacksonville has so much navigable water here. Whether it's the St. John's River, which flows north, one of the few rivers in the country, really in the world that flows north, or if it's on the ocean, the intercoastal, or even the lakes and streams that kind of feed off of the St. John's River, you have plenty of options. Whether if you want to boat, fish, kayak, tube, hit some of the sandbars, you have tons of options at your disposal. And it's really one of the reasons why people love Jacksonville, is because there's just so much navigable water, so much things to do on the water here. It's honestly why I love this city, because I myself am a bit of a boater, fisherman myself, and it just constantly is one of those things where the people who live here and are part of that culture, so to speak, they really gravitate towards one another and really do create a sense of community that you don't always get in every city that you can live in. So I think that's a huge bonus when living in Jacksonville. So if you ever wondered if the Jacksonville culture, speaks to who you are as a person, Here's a cool tidbit that I love to go over, and that is that Jacksonville really does speak to each and every person out there. Whether if you are more into the arts, the Riverside Avondale has a lot of art, a lot of history with it. Or if you're looking for something that's more beachy, obviously we have Atlantic Beach, Jax Beach, Neptune Beach, that really gives you more of that beach culture, beach lifestyle. We also have that suburban Mandarin area where it's been around since the 70s and 80s, and it really is one of the most popular places in the more Duval centrally located area of Jacksonville. Or if you really want that suburban area where you get all these amenities and all these extra features with newer construction homes, we have Nocatee, we have Bartram Springs, we have Julington Creek Plantation, Silverleaf, Rivertown, as different master plan communities that can fit those wants and needs as well. So we really truly do have something for everyone here in Jacksonville. All right, here's one for the locals that might be watching this video. Because again, I'm a local myself, and this, in my opinion, holds true. But one thing about Jacksonville is if you ever ask someone who's local how long it takes to get from point A to point B, they're normally going to tell you anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes, even if that drive time is going to be much, much longer. But overall, the reason for that is because the way that the roads are here in Jacksonville, the way that our bridges are, you really can get from point A to point B relatively smoothly. Obviously, traffic can occur, but you do have a lot of options there. And the cool part about Jacksonville is, like I mentioned, the bridges, is we actually have 7 bridges that go across the St. Johns River that make up 7 different ways to kind of get from the east to the west or north to the south of Jacksonville. So that isn't that kind of is embedded in our DNA here in Jacksonville, and it's why sometimes we are called the 7-bridge state, or 7-bridge city, my apologies, when it comes to different nicknames that we've been given over the years. So overall, that is something that the locals are probably going to chuckle about, but that's something that if you're watching this and you want to know more about Jacksonville, that is something you definitely need to know when it comes to living here. And to piggyback off of that, we also have another point that I love to make, and that a lot of people tend to reference when it comes to Jacksonville. Due to its size, you would think, okay, like this is going to be a big city, no one's going to know anybody. But honestly, when it comes to living in Jacksonville, it really is like living in the biggest small town. Now, part of that is because of the way that Jacksonville is set up, the way it's built. Nothing's so centrally located here because of how large an area it is. But you do truly get that Southern hospitality living here. People do kind of watch out for each other. And overall, it's one of those things where whether if you're going to a sporting event, if you're going to a music, a concert, or just you're going to like the arts market down in Riverside, surprisingly, you're going to run into people that especially the longer you live here, more often than not, just because of the fact that everyone is so connected here, despite how large of a city it really is. When it comes to the public transportation here in Jacksonville, to be honest, it's not the best. We have the Skyway downtown, but that's more of a novelty, and buses are limited throughout the area. So when it comes to moving to Jacksonville or living in Jacksonville, one thing I will say is just be prepared for driving and be prepared to having your own vehicle, because it really is truly a driving city. And like I said, with not having that public transportation, it is going to fall more on you and your vehicles rather than what the government, so to speak, provides here in Jacksonville. So when it comes to living in Jacksonville, people don't always reference this as Jacksonville. That is something I do want to also touch on, and that is the fact that you can call it laziness, you can call it simplicity, but a lot of times people who are from Jacksonville will reference living here as I live in Jax, or I live on the First Coast. Different parts of Florida have different names, like the Treasure Coast, stuff like that, but here in Jacksonville, we have the First Coast. Or Jax. And so those are nicknames that have been kind of defining what it is to live in Jacksonville. It helps kind of tie into the culture here in Jacksonville as well. And what I do love about Jacksonville is that we are constantly trying to develop the area as well. One of the biggest developments that has just recently been announced and is being worked on is actually the improvements being done to the Jacksonville Jaguars football stadium. This is a big development. It is a $1.4 billion venture, and ideally it is going to help bring more traction, more businesses, and more people down to the Jacksonville area, more so the downtown area, whether it's for sporting events or other events as well. So it really does, it really does add into the lifestyle of living here in Jacksonville. So those are the 15 things you must know about Jacksonville before you make your move here and begin living here. It is a lot of great content, and if you want to go into a deeper dive on it, all you gotta do is call me, text me, email me, or in the description of this video is going to be a link to my calendar where you can set a time for us to meet face-to-face or through Zoom. Because at the end of the day, my goal is to help provide value to you when you're deciding on where you and your family are going to move to or want to move to in the future, specifically here in Jacksonville, Florida. And ultimately, as someone who's lived here their whole life, other than when I was in college, I went to FSU, was a Florida State Seminole over there. You know, I have lived here most of my life, and that is because I personally love how family-friendly this community is. I mean, as I'm recording this, I was talking to one of the people here that was just walking around this beautiful park that we have, Fort Family Field, where again you have these turf fields behind us. And as we were talking about, it really does give anyone who's looking to move here an area to make their own, and does fit a lot of things that you are looking for, whether you have a family, or if you're someone that's a single individual, or if you're someone that's looking to retire. So again, if you want to know more about what it's like to live in Jacksonville, call me, text me, email me. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you guys again in our next one.